I'm very excited to have Lydia Burns, our specialty food specialist, sharing with us all about the magical thing called chocolate. So, Lydia, please, I know everyone is excited to hear what you have to say about this
Good.
delight.
Well, I'm going to start by prefacing this with that I definitely am not a chocolate expert. There's people who, much like I have devoted most of my professional life understanding cheese, there's people who definitely go really deep chocolate wise, and there's some really great books out there that I can send to Christine if you guys are interested. But chocolate's something that I'd say in the last 10 years has really increased in interest, which means there's more people making it, and there's just more chocolate bars offered in the marketplace. And a lot of them are packaged premium. They look really nice. They're really appealing. I think it falls into that category of like wine, where sometimes we buy equally as much by the packaging as we do the product. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of times I think there is sort of a correlation, but usually nicer brands tend to have nice packaging because they want it to look like a premium product. They want to differentiate it from the Hershey's or, you know, some of the larger brands and practices by, you know, same way a nice wine tends to have a nice label. You know, there is something in that we buy with we consume with our eyes as much as anything else, especially because you don't usually get to try these things before you buy them. So hopefully today I'll be able to give you guys some pointers when you're, you know, facing this wall of chocolate in a Whole Foods or a specialty store, kind of how to find what different terms might mean and how to find the products you like. Because at the end of the day, it's all about your taste. And, you know, I always like to say that I sort of embrace the entire spectrum of flavors. And I don't want to say that one item is like, in terms of your own appreciation of it, only you can determine what you like. And maybe Hershey's is your favorite chocolate bar, and there's nothing wrong with that because there might be visceral memories attached to that. I mean, there's so much about eating food that's tied to memory and place. So a lot of it is nostalgic, but there are also things you want to look for when sourcing your chocolate, especially if you're paying a certain price point for it. You want to make sure you're getting what you're paying for. And honestly, chocolate can be very confusing. And there isn't a lot of standardization in terms of some of the marketing terms, you know, like you might see artisan, and that's usually that denotes something made in a smaller quantity, but it's not regulated. So really anyone can use that word. Something like small batch usually indicates a higher quality, or, you know, someone is taking more pains. There's more human intervention in the process when you're making small batch. You have more malleability and often the ability to sort of cater and tweak the recipes maybe to a specific bean you're working with. I would say that this term is often synonymous with the term bean to bar, which has become more common, I'd say maybe in the last like 5 to 6 years. And again, this usually just denotes something that's being made on a smaller scale and in small batches, and that they're doing everything on site. They're obviously sourcing the beans from countries and climates where they're technically not beans, they're pods with seeds, but they're large seeds. So they people refer to them as beans. But if we're being technical, they're seeds. But they get roasted like coffee. So I think a lot of times people they're little black, you know, pods. So I think that people often confuse them, but I should use the right term, the seeds. When you get the seeds and then or maybe they're fermented and then you're roasting them and then grinding them. I'll go over all the steps of making it in a sec, but you're doing that all on site before turning it into a bar. Some people purchase chocolate that's pretty much already made, and then they're melting it down into bars and adding flavors. So obviously those people don't have as much control over the end result because they're really starting it in the middle. And so that's what that bean to bar means, is that it's made in smaller batches, and every step of the process, besides the farming aspects, are being handled with that maker. And I did send Christine a list of recommended purveyors because, you know, there's so many and I don't want to limit it because it really depends on what you're looking for. Stylistically, there's so many broad styles, which we'll get into now. So before we get into kind of some of the designations you might see on bars all the time, like milk chocolate, dark chocolate, white chocolate, sometimes you'll see raw chocolate, or sometimes you'll see direct trade, fair trade. All these terms are important, but in order to sort of understand that a little better, first just gonna do a very abbreviated version of the make process, but just hitting sort of the high level points, which will be the most important to understanding then what how that's going to affect what you see on the labels. So the pods from the Thebroma tree, the cocoa tree, are harvested, and they're about this big, and they vary quite drastically in appearance based on where they're grown, how they're grown. Some are sort of, probably seen them on packages before. Before they're treated, they have, some are yellow and red, sort of streaked. Sometimes they're a little more purple. There's a lot of different colors that can occur. Obviously, once they're roasted, they turn darker. But so those are harvested off the trees, and then the seeds inside and the pulp that surrounds them is removed. And then those are fermented, it's sort of in big bins for several days. And then after they're fermented, they are dried. The drying has to happen quickly or else mold develops. So if it's in a hot enough climate, that drying will be done by air or the sun. And in other places it's done, you know, maybe indoors with some intervention just to ensure that it happens fast enough that the pods don't, that they don't start to mold. So how it's, even the nuances of how it's dried will affect the end flavor, also the individual fermenting process of the farmer. But again, these are things that the chocolate maker doesn't have a lot of control over, but what they do have control over is the relationships they forge and whether they're working direct with farmers where they can have some say in the process, and also usually means that the farmers can be more fairly paid, or a lot of people buy them from like a broker, someone who goes to the farms and has these connections and sources, and then you buy those from them. And there are good brokers and bad brokers. So, you know, that also doesn't necessarily mean that just because someone isn't working direct with the farmer that the product isn't good. So then after the drying, then the beans, or sorry, the seeds are roasted. And after they're roasted, they are sort of ground and pressed into, and while they're pressed, they're separated into two main components, which is really what's going to go into most chocolates. They're filtered into what they call the liquor, just like the same thing you drink, and that's kind of the solid matter of the cocoa, and then the cocoa butter, which is the fat content of it. And so they separate those. And then the next part of the process, which really becomes important, this is when you determine, are you making a dark chocolate, a milk chocolate, is the blend then of those liquors is gonna sort of determine is gonna be determined by what style you make. So with a dark chocolate, there tends to be less of the cocoa butter used, because when you make milk chocolate, you have to add powdered milk or some sort of condensed milk. And in order to sort of incorporate that, you need extra cocoa butter. So there's actually usually more cocoa butter in milk chocolate. But then there's something I'd say that's somewhat newer and probably one of my favorite products, which is a dark milk chocolate. And a dark milk chocolate is when, if you see a milk chocolate that has a larger cocoa percentage. So I'd say that's probably one of the one of the largest things you usually see on a label is this percentage. Not all of them have it, but a lot of, especially smaller producers, they do denote, you might see something like 50, or you might see something as high as 75. Usually anything 50, I'd say 35 to 50 is usually a milk chocolate. And then dark chocolates will usually start in the low to mid 50s and range anywhere up to 100%. It's just most people don't like 100%. They want a little bit of sugar.
It's
And
intense.
so I guess I should explain what that percentage is, because I'm implying it, but I didn't specifically say it. So the percentage denotes what percentage of the total weight of the bar is derived from the cocoa tree. So that percentage is the amount of the cocoa liquor plus the cocoa butter in the bar. That total number determines the percentage. So the percentage it's a measure of how much of the product is directly derived from the cocoa. But because you don't necessarily know how much of that is cocoa butter and how much of that is the liquor, that's why you might experience things like a bar that's 50 from one brand and it might taste really delicate and sort of mild. And then you might have a 50% from a different producer and it might taste more like an intense dark chocolate to you. And that's again because usually what's remaining in chocolate ingredient wise after those cocoa products is sugar. Sugar will be the next ingredient. So again, the higher the percentage, the less sugar there is in the bar by weight. And then in some cases, there are emulsifiers added, usually to more mass-produced products or products that you want a longer shelf life. That emulsifier, like usually it's soy lecithin or some sort of lecithin derivative, that will be in there. And then, of course, additionally, this is where reading the ingredients in the bar is really going to teach you a lot about the bar itself too, because ideally you want it to be as much cocoa derived as possible in terms of purity. But for larger brands, if they want to get more value out of it, they do sometimes add vegetable oils of some sort in place of cocoa butter. So that would send that overall percentage number down even lower. And a lot of times these brands aren't going to put that percentage on the label because it's not going to look good for them.
Yeah.
So you kind of have, but you can read between the lines for yourself and figure that out. But again, there's not necessarily anything wrong with having a filler. It's just if you're really looking for the true cocoa experience and trying to learn about the broad range of all the influences of this complicated product, you're not going to find that as much in a product that does have fillers. You're not going to be able to taste that essence as much. So first thing is you're going to want to look at the ingredients on your bar, and maybe it has flavors added. And I actually really enjoy, even when you get a high quality chocolate bar, I think additives like can add flavors, like a Madagascar, pretty classic Madagascar sourced cocoa bean profile it's really fruity, really fruit forward, which I love. So sometimes if you add, like there's some bars where they'll have like freeze dried raspberries throughout it, which I love with those fruitier varietals because it just brings out those varieties all together. So I say if you enjoy like the intermixing of flavors, then don't shy away from bars that have flavors added. You just, again, need to know that you're getting a bar that was good quality to begin with. And then all of those additives will also be good. All those inclusions is what they call it technically. Like if you have nuts in a bar or fruit, or sometimes now there'll be, lavender, or maybe there's even some savory items. Like I've had a bar with porcini mushrooms in it, which was actually very good, but definitely weirder. But as this market grows, there's more innovation coming out of there. You see people really playing with these flavors. So after you've separated and then reblended your bar, there's a step called conching. And this is really going to make sure that the end bar has a really smooth texture. And some styles, that's not the desired outcome. So they might just by their own preference conch less. It's really, again, up to the maker in terms of what kind of texture of bar they're looking for, how long they conch it. And the conching it's essentially like a grinder that has metal beads in it, and it is warm enough that it maintains the chocolate in a liquid state, and it stirs it. It essentially stirs it. And this can happen anywhere from a couple hours to 72 hours. And then lastly, that chocolate is going to be tempered before it reaches its final form. And tempering is just sort of manipulating the temperature to ensure that the end product is smooth. Because you might notice sometimes if you've had chocolate around for a while, or maybe you had chocolate, it melted in your purse, and then it reformed at room temperature, and it gets these little white things on it. Well, it's not mold, first of all. That's always, people think it's mold. It's not. It's called blooms. And what the blooming is essentially the solid parts of it have, because of that last step of tempering, essentially what you're doing is you're using the temperature to make sure the surface is super shiny. Like if you've ever seen those cakes where they put a tempered chocolate layer on it, it's that same idea to get that glass effect. But because there's these fats and solids, proteins in the chocolate, if it gets really warm and really cold or undergoes a lot of fluctuation, the emulsification breaks essentially, and those will rise to the top. You can still eat the chocolate. If you eat it as is, the texture might be a little off because it's leached some of that fat, but it's still perfectly good. And I actually recommend using it for baking or something where you're going to heat it, dipping, baking, because there's nothing wrong with it. It just essentially has, broken. And if you heat it up, it'll reform itself better than if you just try to eat it as is. But in case that ever happens, I would say that's the way to go about it. But and then that's the last step in the process. And then, in terms of these designations, dark chocolate, milk, white, well, white is arguable that it's not technically chocolate because it's only made from the cocoa butter and not the cocoa solids, the cocoa liqueur. So it's cocoa butter, sugar, and then usually some sort of milk or milk powder. And then oftentimes vanilla is added as well. And then the milk chocolate is both the cocoa butter and the liquor added with that milk powder. And then again, sometimes it can also have, any of them can have those emulsifiers, the soy lecithin added. And then dark chocolate is going to only be the sugar, the cocoa butter, and the cocoa liqueur. Ideally, again, some people add vanilla. And then, within those, you'll get the ranges. Typically for high quality milk chocolate is usually considered to exist around 50%. High quality dark chocolate is typically 65 or above. And then for white chocolate, 30% is what those are. Again, there's a lot of other things that go into quality, but just in terms of the amount of cocoa that each of those should be made of as sort of benchmarks of good quality, those are the numbers. So we often hear this term single origin. Again, this is something we hear with coffee as well and other products, or sometimes it might be labeled single estate, single plantation. This all means the same thing, and it's that they know the origin of their beans geographically, down to at least the country or region, but hopefully even more so the specific farm. And there's lots of regions. There's too many to go over, unfortunately, that are popular right now. But hopefully some of these producers that I did give Christine, if you're really into that, you can check out their websites and you'll see there's like, you know, they'll have Belize, they'll have Madagascar, they have, you know, Mexico, Hawaii is a very coveted region currently for cacao. But there are like, just like wines, there are sort of different, you know, different ones that are considered really high quality, but then which ones you actually enjoy yourself are, it's going to be up to you, because some are really, I would say, go more in what I consider a more masculine flavor profile, where you get this like tobacco, woods,
Coffee.
smokiness, even like intent leather, you know, these sort of flavors. And then on the other end, there's ones that have much more delicate, like fruity, acidic, bright, you know, floral sort of notes. And so it's really hard to say. I don't want to say one region is better than the other, because they're not. It really depends on your own preferences and what you enjoy. I really like Belize and Madagascar a lot. Again, I like the really fruit forward ones. But that being said, I've had some really fantastic ones from all over. So I don't want to limit you guys. And then another thing you might see, it's not as common because I think it's really hard to make good, but you might see something labeled as a raw chocolate bar. And what that means is that it's never been heated above 118 degrees Fahrenheit. So that means these are, in order to make raw chocolate, essentially you can't roast the beans because roasting happens at 200 degrees. So it's hard to make a really good chocolate raw, and you don't see too many people doing it. Some people do think there are, like the raw food movement, some people think there are health benefits to it. Some people think the roasting adds additional, you know, it kind of goes both ways. But there is one producer in Brooklyn that makes really good raw bars. They're called Raaka, Raaka. So if that is something you're interested in, I would seek them out. I think they're by far the best ones I've had. They're really tasty bars. And they do other things to kind of supplement flavor in, like they barrel age the cocoa pods to extract more flavors, things that don't add heat that can add flavor. So I'm not, again, the raw thing, it's either for you or it's not. I'm not advocating for it one way or the other. But if you see something labeled as raw, that's what it means. There's a couple, mostly domestic producers making raw chocolates. And then you might hear the terms cacao or cocoa. They're really interchangeable. It depends on what native language you might be speaking, which term you would use. But they really mean the same thing. So, and depending on what country the bar originates, it might use one or the other. But yeah, and then I actually have a couple little chocolates here. Figured I'd walk you guys quickly kind of through the process of tasting chocolate. Because the best way for you guys to learn about chocolate, and the best way I've learned about it, is by being a buyer. I got sent a lot of samples and I tasted them all. And the more you get to taste, that's how you learn what you like, especially with chocolate. Because again, you're going to find makers you like. Then you're going to find specific regions where the chocolate is grown that you prefer. And so there's all these overlapping layers, or you're going to find people who you just prefer the texture overall, and it might not matter as much where it's coming from. So it's subjective. You guys have to figure out what you like. But I think the best way to find out about it is to do a little tasting for yourself. And I recommend, if you want to increase your learning curve, taste multiple bars at once. Because the more you have to reference off of, the more you'll actually taste in the bars themselves. Because if you taste them individual, you won't realize the differences as much. So I usually recommend, like, if it's a fun little event, you could do it as a family, or like, roommate group, whatever. But I say do a minimum of 3 bars, maximum of 6. I wouldn't go above that. And then you're going to want to compare and contrast, take some notes. And then it's going to be super hard to remember what ones you like, because this gets confusing, but take notes. Not necessarily the ones you don't like, although sometimes it is helpful so you don't buy it again if you can't remember that you did. But if you at least write down the maker you like, or maybe the maker and where the chocolate came from, if it is an origin bar. And then you might not be able to find that same producer everywhere, but someone at the shop might be able to recommend something similar, or you might be able to find someone else's, a different maker's Belize bar that you could try, and then see, again, add to your notes. So I have kind of like 2 fancy bars and 1, what I would say, like middle bar. It's not fancy, but it's a Ritter Sport, which I'm sure most of you guys have seen, and it's just their milk chocolate bar. I really love milk chocolate, so I do love dark chocolate too. I think it has more complexity, but sometimes I just want milk chocolate, especially with something salty. I think that's the best combo. But the first thing you want to do is you're going to smell it. And you want to be careful, because applying heat to it will allow more aromas to open up, but it'll also melt the chocolate. But you don't want to melt too much before you eat. So if you want to really get into the aroma, you can put it in a little glass cup and kind of cup it, and more of the smell will come out that way. But then I always say that then you're going to want to bite directly into it. I think it's good to experience the texture, because there should be a snap. Like if it's made properly, there should be a little bit of a snap to it. You also want to make sure it's room temperature when you taste it. Don't want it too cold or too warm. Around 70 degrees is perfect. And then I'm not going to do it because it's hard to demonstrate with it in my mouth, but I'll do it after. Then after you bit it, you want to let it melt on your tongue for a little bit, a couple, maybe count 10 seconds. And then as it melts, more flavors will open up. So then what I recommend doing is, while it's sitting on your tongue, you're going to take a couple of deep breaths in, because you taste, what you experience as flavor is a combination of aroma and the flavor, the taste you perceive in your mouth itself. So if you sort of breathe in through your nose while the chocolate's sitting in your mouth, you'll kind of experience some other aromas. And then after that, I recommend sort of moving it around your palate. Push it to the roof of your mouth, push it around the sides, just kind of let it coat your whole mouth so you can get a sense of the texture, and then you can be done with it. And then after that, eat it however you like. But this is how you're going to taste a little bit deeper if you want to really taste the essence of what is underlying. And the milk chocolate, I think my tip for finding good milk chocolate is, yes, it does have to do with the maker itself, but usually too, if you think of places that have good milk, they're probably going to have good milk chocolate, like the Alps in Switzerland. Ritter Sport, Lindt. I think Lindt has great milk chocolate. And again, there are larger brands that still make good chocolate. There's Caille, which is another Swiss Alpine brand. The Ritter Sport sources milk from the Alps as well, from Germany. And they just have some fun flavors in general. But that's usually my pro tip for milk chocolate, because beyond that, it's sort of, there's so much variation in milk chocolate. So you really have to look at the labels and kind of see what you're getting. Like in this case, sugar, milk, cocoa butter are the first 3 ingredients. So that's good. And then the chocolate liqueur. There's hazelnut paste in here, which is super surprising. Because it's not labeled, like, they make
it doesn't say there's nuts.
So I guess tip to people who have nut allergies, you should probably already are reading all the labels on these, but definitely look out for milk chocolate.
Yes, those with nut allergies, we do really scour those labels
Yeah.
for her.
So that's kind of an interesting, it probably just adds again to that richness of texture, kind of like gianduja, which is the Italian hazelnut chocolate concoction. So that's interesting. And then I have actually, which is kind of confusing because it's called a black chocolate bar and it is actually black. But that's because this is actually a milk chocolate bar. But this is made by a producer in Iceland called, oops, upside down, Omnom. And they are super cool, make really weird bars. If any of you guys have watched the Zac Efron show on Netflix called Down to Earth, they visit this place in Iceland. Sort of random, but I guess they explore a lot of like food and health in that show. So if you're interested in checking out their facility, it's in the Iceland episode. And they make bean to bar chocolate, but they like to highlight flavors of Iceland. So they do kind of a lot of weird stuff. And this one is definitely an example of that. So it's cocoa butter, sugar, and then Icelandic milk powder, roasted barley malt. There's actually toasted Icelandic barley on the outside. And then there's activated charcoal from Iceland in there, which is why it is black. And then there's some sea salt in there as well. And the salt is also lava salt derived from Iceland. So kind of deceiving because it looks like if you just saw this, you would assume it's going to be super dark and bitter, but it's actually quite creamy and rich. And they also make dark chocolate with licorice in it, which is their licorice, black licorice. And I do not like black licorice at all. It's so good in the chocolate. They have one, it's chocolate raspberry licorice, and it's fantastic. So again, maybe also it's fun to try things in combination with chocolate that maybe you don't like otherwise. Because I'm pretty sure chocolate makes everything taste better. And then last, I have a super traditional dark chocolate. This is going to be a brand for people who are dark chocolate lovers. It's called Maru. And this is a really cool brand. It's all made in Vietnam from cocoa that is native and grown in Vietnam. So they have a bunch of different varietals, like this is Dong Nai, but it's all, every single thing that goes into the bar is grown, made in Vietnam. So they don't make a milk chocolate because milk is not something that is consumed widely in Vietnam. But what they do make is a coconut milk bar, and it's pretty awesome for vegans that like or miss milk chocolate. It's a pretty good alternative. But there's, I think, like this one is 72, and this is one of the lighter, the lower percentages they have. So I went for that because I tend to like, again, those more fruit forward ones, and those tend to be usually live in the 65 to 75 range. But this one is, I think their stuff's really fun. And if you like dark chocolate, it's fun to just taste even just the differences from all of these varieties that came from the same country, which is a very small country. So that's a fun little way to compare as well. Like you can get, and they do these little bars, so that's nice. It makes it a little more affordable. And you can do a little set where you get one of each of their bars. So that's a fun way to sort of explore dark chocolate. But yeah, I would say like the main categories I sort of break things out into for you guys, you know, because everyone sort of does a little bit of everything now. But I consider classic people who are exploring different single origin bars and then maybe doing a couple signature, addition bars of their own design. So I gave an extensive list to Christine of producers that fall under that umbrella that I really like. Then there's what I would call
one second, Lydia. Where would they be able to find these bars that you're just showing us? Is this something they're going to be able to find at Whole Foods, or are there other places they should be shopping for them?
I bought these, actually all three of them I got at L&M Fine Foods, which is in Lincoln Square. Omnom, I've seen around. I don't think Whole Foods carries either of these brands. That's not to say that they do carry Madakas, which is a great Madagascar one I like. The good thing about chocolate is that, unfortunately, I would say there aren't a ton of shops that, to my knowledge, in Chicago that focus on. There's some great local confectioners, but they don't necessarily sell this kind of chocolate. They mostly sell things that they make themselves. So I think Hannah's Bretzel actually has a large chocolate
Yes.
selection.
Hannah's Pretzel, they tend to have chocolate walls. And then there is in the Water Tower place, the chocolate closet that is down in one of the marketplace areas, like across, so where Food Life is, on the opposite side of the building, there's like a whole kind of like marketplace with like prepared foods. I'm not certain if it's open at this time, but they probably would be, because it's a lot of gifting opportunity and foods that you could shop for there. And they have what they call their chocolate closet. And a lot of them are in smaller bars too. So really easy if you want to get a lot of different things to kind of try against each other.
Yeah. And then the other thing is that there's great chocolate online stores where you can literally find hundreds of things. I also have a friend who runs a really cool shop in Detroit, and they ship here. It's called Monger's Provisions, and he usually has like 200 different bars at a time that are available. So, I mean, I don't know of anywhere like that kind of selection here in Chicago, which is kind of crazy. But I just think it's just because a lot of times it's candy stores and they sell a variety of stuff. They don't necessarily focus on just the bean to bar stuff. But you can definitely find all of this stuff online. There's some extensive shops. There's even like clubs you can join. Well, they'll send you a different selection. But I think, for me in that classic category, there's a mix of domestic producers as well as people from all over the world doing cool stuff. And then there's going to be the stuff I like the most, which is what I would call the innovative chocolatiers, people like Omnom. There's a company called Cacao Sampaka that's based out of Barcelona. And it's actually an offshoot, the brother of the famous molecular gastronomist who started El Bulli. This is his brother's chocolate company. So they kind of utilize a lot of molecular gastronomy. They have a gin and tonic bar that is effervescent in your mouth. I don't know how, but it's really cool. I love everything they do. And that's CACAOSAMPAKA. Kind of weird spelling.
SAMP
AKA.
AKA. Okay.
Yeah, Sampaka. Close though. There is a company from Singapore called Fosa, and they make dark chocolate bars that are flavored with a lot of more FOSSA, sorry. That they make more like strange Asian flavored bars, but they're great too. They make some tea infused bars, lots of really cool stuff. And then there's so many people doing kind of radical stuff. Another one I really like is Pump Street. They're British and they were a bakery originally, and they make really awesome bars, and they grind down their different bread varieties and they put the breadcrumbs in the different bars. So they'll have like a milk chocolate and rye breadcrumb bar, or like a dark chocolate sourdough crumb bar. And it's a really interesting texture and flavor. And the bar, like just the plain chocolate, is also super high quality. So it's just a really, really fun bar all around. It's like put bread in anything.
Bread and chocolate.
And then another one I put in this category, I mean, there's so many, but Akesson's, and that's AKESSONS. they're a French producer, but they're super unique in that they're also farmers and they own a plantation in Madagascar. And they were the chocolate company that really popularized Madagascar and put it on the map. And because of their influence, they've actually sort of, in a large ways, shaped the expected terroir flavor of Madagascar chocolate through their practices. But they also farm like crazy peppercorns and all these other things, and they put those in their bars in addition to making just the traditional bars. And so those are really cool too. And then I think if you like really dark chocolate, I mentioned the Maru's great. Another person I would look for is Francois Prowlus, Pralus. And that's a traditional French producer, but they represent, they're another one where you could buy a flight and get like 20 different single origin bars, but most of their bars are 75% or higher. So they really focus on the darker, rich, pure dark chocolate expressions. So that's a great way, I think, to start with one brand as sort of a baseline and then taste different varietals through them, I think is really the way to do it. And then from there, you can figure out maybe you like other brands better, but it's a good way to just kind of get a baseline of like, okay, these taste stronger to me, these taste more fruity, this is more what I like, this is not what I'm looking for, just because then you sort of have one control in place. But then realize that there will be variation, and maybe you'll like a bar from a different person of that variety that you didn't like from someone else. So unfortunately, it's not the most helpful. You just have to eat a lot of chocolate.
If that's what we have to do, so.
Yeah.
All right, well, does anyone have any questions at all? Okay, so got one right off the bat.
Yeah.
They used to say the darker, the healthier. Is that still true?
I mean, not necessarily. Like, yes. Well, it depends on how you define health, I guess.
Yeah.
What is always true is that the higher the percentage, the less sugar that's in it. So from a health perspective, yeah, like usually sugar isn't the best thing for you. So but then again, like having a 70% bar that is sugar, or there's that, it's gonna have a little bit of sweetness, but I think it's still, you're going to get those antioxidants, which is what people are concerned. The health benefits of the cocoa itself, you'll probably get from anything, 50%, 45, 50% or above. But yeah, you'll probably get more concentration of it. A dark chocolate is more of a superfood. It's going to have higher concentrations of it. If that makes sense.
Okay. And then as in wine, are there some years for harvesting in chocolate that are better? And is that something that would be on the label?
I've never seen vintages on chocolate. I don't know if it's because, I think it's because, so like in olive oil, there is a harvest and a vintage, much like wine, because all of that fruit is being picked within a very specific period when it's ripe. But with the cocoa pods, I don't believe that there is one harvest season. I think it's ongoing. So it wouldn't be so, there isn't a harvest might happen every couple days or a couple weeks versus once a year.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, the answer is probably yes. Like there are factors, it's an agricultural product. So the weather, if there is like drastic fires happening in that region, all these things are going to affect that. But unfortunately, because it's not harvested one time a year, the way wine or olive oil is, it's not, it's a little bit harder to trace the exact day or batch it's made from. I mean, I'm sure in some of these smaller ones, they're labeled, but even with that, like, I think because so much of it is in the process, that if you're starting with a high enough quality product from your farmer, a lot of what the end product is going to happen is going to come down to that process, which I guess is true of wine too. You make champagne, you blend it, but just because it's not harvested in a single harvest the way wine is, they don't label it that way. So, I think it's harder to find that information because it's not built into the process.
Okay. Anything else, folks? How long can you keep it, milk or regular chocolate?
Well, it kind of depends on how you're keeping it. It's pretty stable. I would say like most of these bars have, they're all dated till, this one's dated to 8/8/2021. So, you get about a year on them for sure. But the caveat being, it has to be stored in a constant temperature that isn't too cold or too warm. So like you don't want to put it in the fridge.
And in a drier setting too, not too humid.
Yeah, you don't want too much humidity. My kitchen has a door to outside. So except for when like the oven's on, it's pretty cool in there. So I keep my chocolate in the cupboard that's the furthest away from the stove and the closest to the door. So it kind of is the coldest area. And then it's dark in there as well. So you're not getting the light potentially melting it. And you always want to, who can hold on to chocolate for a year? Anyways, bless your heart if you can. My grandma could probably. But I would say ideally you want to keep it, make sure it's not getting too hot, getting too cold, and consume it as soon as possible. But, within 6 months but really if you forget about it and find it a year later, it's not going to be bad.
Yeah. Might not just,
it might have bloomed.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, it bloomed or might not taste as premium as it did before. So, okay. I think that was our round of questions for the night. Anything else you would like to add before we wrap it up, Lydia?
No, I think that's it. I mean, I think like all things, you have to do the hard work and
taste it. Yeah.
Just get out there and taste. And I know like people think it sounds weird, but the only way to learn, the reason I know about all these products is I've worked with them and I've had access to trying a lot of things, which has been that's the way I've learned. And I take a lot of notes. And don't be afraid of what you taste. You're not wrong. Taste is subjective. So, if you taste it, it's right. So I encourage you to, when you taste things, to think about it and think deeply. Maybe it smells like this, maybe it tastes like this, and just take some notes for yourself. The more you do it, the more you'll form your own language to discuss these things. And I think that's the most important part, because then you can share it with other people. And, when we're not in a COVID era, I always encourage you to taste in groups, because hearing other people's input, like someone might say, well, I taste cherry. And then all of a sudden you'll be like, yes, like it's totally there, but I didn't pick up on it. It's good to do it with other people and not just in a vacuum, because you learn just as much from what other people taste as what you taste. So enjoy it. Have fun.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Lydia. This is our last talk with you before our little break, but I will be working with Lydia to come up with some other topics for 2021. So if you have any topics that you would like to request for a future Taste Talk on any kind of specialty foods or cheese or anything of the such, please reach out to me at taste@nl.edu. And thank you so much, everyone. I hope to see some of you all tomorrow for Wine Wednesday, where our topic will be perfect for this time of year, as we will be discussing bubbles. All right. So
I want to add something quickly.
Yeah.
We were talking about honey a week or two ago.
Oh yeah.
And I bought chocolate filled with Manuka honey in New Zealand. That was an amazing combination.
Wow.
That sounds delicious.
I never saw it here in the US, but it was one of the best I ever tried.
Yeah, I mean, in New Zealand, Manuka honey is everywhere. That's where I had it first. I worked on a vineyard in New Zealand a long time ago, but yeah, they had Manuka honey everywhere and in everything. That sounds
But
delicious, though. I don't think I had it in chocolate.
yeah, it was not extremely sweet as I thought. It was just
Yeah,
perfect.
that sounds good.
Well, it's fun.
To add to the question before, let's say that it's really strange, but let's say that you forgot about the chocolate for 4 or 5 years. Would you still eat it, or it's too much?
I'd look at it. I mean, if I'm being honest, I've definitely pushed the limits of what should and should not be eaten. As someone who's worked with cheese, I've eaten a lot of things that are bad. Like you just don't know sometimes. So with chocolate, the good news is it's not gonna like if you have a bad cheese or you have like milk that's it's bad and it's gross. But chocolate's not gonna get gross. It's just gonna get mild. Like it's gonna lose some of its flavor. And again, if it's been stored at a cool enough temperature, it'll maintain its texture, but most likely, usually over that amount of time, it's kind of done some of this. So it might have bloomed. Um, Again, I probably wouldn't throw it out because I hate wasting food. It's like I was raised in an Irish family where like you ate everything or you repurposed it. So that's always my thing. I'd probably cook with it. I'd bake with it. I'd probably like break it up and put it in cookies. But I really don't think it's gonna hurt you. It's just maybe not gonna taste like much. Or maybe it's gonna be really good. It might be fine. I mean, I think,
You won't
again,
know until you taste it.
it's not going to hurt you though. If you are curious and wanting to maybe consume it, you should be okay.
I myself may be hanging on to a box of Frango mints from back in Marshall Field's days in my freezer. So, or did we eat that? Maybe we ate that last year. I don't know, but I've been holding on to an original Marshall Field's box. So yeah. There's nostalgia in the things that you eat. So
Yeah.
all right. Well, thank you again, everyone. Have a great evening, and I hope to see some of you tomorrow at Mary's discussion of champagne, prosecco, cava, anything that has bubbles in it. So, thanks a lot, folks. Have a great night. Bye.
Bye.